The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Massie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege, please.
May proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, economic growth, job creation, and wage growth is the most important public policy challenge facing our country and our Commonwealth. The rate of real economic growth is the single greatest determinant of both America's strength as a nation, the well-being of the American people, and the well-being of all Virginians. Without economic growth, Mr. Speaker, we cannot adequately pay for our national defense, our state and local public safety, provide for our families, educate our children, or take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. And Mr. Speaker, I have some dire, frightening news with respect to economic growth, job creation, and wage growth. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported last Friday that in 2015, U.S. real GDP growth was just 2.38%. Given that, Mr. Speaker, 2015 will have been the 10th year in a row, Mr. Speaker, that real GDP growth has come in under 3%. To put that into some historical perspective, the previous longest such stretch of sub-3% growth was for 4 years only, not 10, from 1930 to 1933, or during the Great Depression. Mr. Speaker, we are experiencing the worst economic recovery from a recession since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Even worse, Mr. Speaker, the Congressional Budget Office is now forecasting that the United States of America will never see 3% growth again. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for the 50 years from 1964 through 2014, average hourly real wages in 2014 constant dollars for production and non-supervisory employees in the private sector grew a little less than 8%. Would anybody in here be happy with an 8% real pay raise over 50 years? With respect to Virginia, Mr. Speaker, in 2014, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, our state's real GDP growth was 0. That ranked Virginia 48th in the country, only ahead of Alaska and Mississippi. For the decade from 2004 through 2014, Virginia's compound annual growth rate in GDP was a whopping 1.3% a year. Mr. Speaker, I have 4 children. And the main reason I do that is because this job is because of my children and our grandchildren. And Mr. Speaker, we're in the process of leaving our children and our grandchildren as their inheritance from us, a nation and a commonwealth with much, much less economic opportunity than we ourselves inherited. Mr. Speaker, we're also leaving them with a $19 trillion national debt, or $59,000 of debt for every man, woman, and child. And Mr. Speaker, the federal government continues to spend. Now I want you to pay attention to this number. I'm going to tell you how much money the federal government spends an hour. Continues to spend $450 million an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And, Mr. Speaker, their revenues are only $385 million an hour. Thus, Mr. Speaker, our federal government is deficit spending even today. And oh, guess what? The revenue numbers are actually a little better over the last couple of years, but they continue to deficit spend at the rate of $65 million an hour. And Mr. Speaker, this current dismal and projected economic growth is a self-inflicted, avoidable public policy wound. It is the result of higher punitive marginal tax rates, a regulatory environment on irrational steroids, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, Clean Power Plan, and on poor public policy decisions. The data is clear, Mr. Speaker. The numbers do not lie. The Obama-McCullough track record of the past 7 years has been and is projected to be a record of dismal failure. Again, a self-inflicted poor public policy wound. A clear result of this, and something all of us in this room ought to stand, an indicator of this dismal economic failure is the Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders economic populism that is selling so well to large swaths of Virginians who are rightfully angry because they and their families are doing so poorly. Mr. Speaker, this Obama-McCullough track record of economic failure is unacceptable. It makes me and many Virginians very angry because our government is failing us. So, Mr. Speaker, what has and what will the House Republican Caucus, hopefully in a bipartisan manner, do about this dismal economic performance? The House of Delegates has led the effort to create many good-paying jobs for Virginians. Since 2003, we have defeated 26 job-killing taxes that would have cost Virginia's families over $30 billion. We have fostered a reasonable state regulatory and tort environment. We passed legislation to encourage entrepreneurs and innovators to invest in startup companies via crowdfunding and angel tax credits. We have greatly expanded our job-creating economic incentive programs, especially in the fields of future like technology, data, and cybersecurity. Just ask President Sands. We have worked hard to align our educational system with the needs of the private sector and to streamline our workforce programs. But, Mr. Speaker, past is prologue. Our 2016 economic agenda, to mention just 5, include balancing our new 2-year budget without a tax increase. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Jones and all the appropriators, and thank you, Chairman Ware, and all our members of our Finance Committee. 2, enshrining our right to work tradition into Virginia's Constitution. Thank you, Delegate Dickey Bell. Credentialing workforce training programs. Thank you, Delegate Kathy Byron. Establishing Go Virginia, a regional economic development initiative. Thank you, Majority Leader Cox and Caucus Chair Tim Hugo. And finally, Mr. Speaker, number 5, promoting greater transparency in our regulatory process. Mr. Speaker, despite your Wednesday Bible study on worry, I'm worried sick. And I'm embarrassed, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, and we should all be worried sick about, and we should all be embarrassed by the lack of economic opportunity we are leaving our children and our grandchildren as a result of poor public policy. It is our responsibility to do everything in our power to create the public policy environment most conducive to economic growth. We cannot sit on the sidelines and expect this public policy self-inflicted wound to heal on its own. Mr. Speaker, we have a public policy agenda to address this failure during this session, and I sincerely hope we can enact this agenda in a bipartisan manner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.